I saw Demon Slayer Infinity Castle, and I'm here to tell you about it, as well as the fact that this is the longest film of all time that anyone has ever made in the history of cinema. I mean, sure, there are other movies that are technically longer than this movie, but I genuinely felt like several generations of my family came into existence and died over the course of me watching this movie. And that's not me saying I didn't like the movie, it is me saying that this movie opens on a scene, and then right at the end of the movie, we cut back to that same scene, and my honest to God thought was, holy shit, was that this movie? I genuinely thought that was a different movie. I have been here so long. Demon Slayer is the massively popular manga and anime from Shonen Jump, written by Koyoharu Gotege. And if you've never looked into it, you might not realize just how insanely popular Demon Slayer was at its peak. Demon Slayer, at its very peak, its yearly tankopon sales sold more than One Piece, Bleach, and Naruto combined at their absolute peak. Demon Slayer is a series that outsold the big three. That's how fucking huge it is. And like, there was a range of like mitigating factors around it selling that much. Part of it was the pandemic. Part of it was that they had just launched the Demon Slayer movie and there was literally no other movies in the world being released at that time. But even with all that, the fact that anything could like surpass the big three in terms of sheer volume is fucking insane and justifiably makes Demon Slayer like a pop culture phenomenon. As for my opinion on Demon Slayer, I think Demon Slayer is like a pretty decent mid-tier shonen anime. But when I say mid, that word has become like completely infected and lost all meaning. I mean that like in terms of Demon Slayer, it's nowhere near my favorite anime, while I would prefer it much to like the bottom tier of anime. I think it's pretty good. I think you go to Demon Slayer, if you've been watching anime for a while, you go to Demon Slayer for like kind of tropes and scenarios that you have seen before, that you enjoy, that like Demon Slayer to me is kind of a warm blanket. It's like, okay, I'm not going to see anything here I haven't seen before, but what I'm going to see is probably going to be pretty well done. But also, I'm old and I don't matter in terms of modern anime discourse. Demon Slayer is also massively resonant with like a younger audience, has a lot of female viewers, and I think the reason for that is that its author, Koyoharu Gotege, is a woman and has made a kind of softer sort of shonen compared to a lot of stuff, and it's just resonated with a much wider audience. I do think there was a point where, for me, Demon Slayer and Jujutsu Kaisen were kind of running neck and neck. They were kind of like both as interesting as each other. But for me anyway, Jujutsu Kaisen kept like evolving and changing and becoming weirder, and I ended up enjoying that far more. But that doesn't mean that I don't have like kind of my own appreciation for Demon Slayer. And a big part of that is that as an anime, Demon Slayer has always been fucking gorgeous. Just one of the most lavishly produced television series in anime that we have ever seen. And I think it was kind of the beginning of what I kind of call the super adaptation. Nowadays, with a lot of anime, especially like, well, anime adapted from manga, you are having this kind of sensation where a massive amount of production quality is being shown in the animations of these, and you are getting things that are so dramatically superior to, well, not superior, but dramatically elaborated on from the manga source material. And like, there is like a history of this. Like, famously, Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter both add a lot in terms of like their manga source material and really elevated their productions into something really interesting and unique. But I would say stuff like Demon Slayer, stuff like One Punch Man, stuff like Jujutsu Kaisen have kind of taken that to this absurd scenario. And what it's resulted in is like, you know, gifs of Demon Slayer going absolutely fucking viral and making it like mainstream in a way that I think little else was, which is what contributed to becoming so massively popular. Infinity Castle is no exception to that. This is one of the most beautifully, lavishly produced anime movies I have ever seen. There are sequences in this that are just really stunningly beautiful, and in particular in how the Infinity Castle is like represented. If you're not familiar, this is basically the end game arc for Demon Slayer. We are following the big bad into their crazy demon fortress where kind of time and space work differently, and I think the way that that is visually represented with this castle, the kind of, it's like a giant, like it's like 1,000 giant Rubik's cubes which all slot together and everything, and it's really, really cool and gives like the film this really gorgeous atmosphere that has been beautifully visually captured. And the fights themselves are absolutely insane. They are just some of the most beautifully animated sword fights I have ever seen in anime, and they feel so intense and impactful, and the sound design is incredible. And that is one of the reasons I really think, like, if you just enjoy the spectacle of cinema, even if you don't know Demon Slayer, I think this is a pretty interesting watch just from that perspective. But I would also say there's some really odd choices in how they chose to kind of recreate the Demon Slayer story here. And a big one is that I really felt that they basically took the manga and verbatim recreated each specific piece. And like, I don't know that for sure because I haven't read the manga, but the reason I noticed that is because you would have a lot of sequences where the same dialogue and concepts are being repeated over and over and over. So there's one fight in this film. The way the film works is it's basically broken down into 3 fights, and you are being taken through those 3 fights. And there's one fight in the middle where the idea is that one person has learned the first form of a sword technique, and the other person has learned forms 2 to 6 of this same sword technique. And that gets repeated about 4 or 5 times. And it's like that because when this thing was like a monthly manga or a weekly manga being produced every week, occasionally you would need to reinforce concepts because it was a week ago that someone read the last part of this fight and they needed to have it like reinforced. But I think what's happened here is it's been adapted in a way that all those like chapters have just been smushed together. So you're reading like, 7 to 8 weeks of storytelling. You are just consuming that in 30 minutes, and the same shit is just getting repeated and repeated and repeated. And that would be a criticism I would have of this film as a whole. I think it so badly needs like an edit down and needs like so much fat trimmed from it, because my god, like, it really just luxuriates in every tiny plot detail. Each of the fights, basically, they have a start, and then they have a middle, and then they have a huge big flashback arc in the middle, and then they have an end. And some of it works and some of it like does not. I've never really understood Zenitsu as a character in Demon Slayer. Basically, Zenitsu is the orange-haired boy who kind of, his whole thing is he's really cowardly, and then he falls asleep and he turns really fucking cool when he falls asleep, and he gets like really good at fighting and everything. I know people love him, just never been my thing. But I think his fight in this is probably the weakest, where it's just kind of, he does this thing where right at the end of oh, by the way, I'm going to be spoiling this movie. If you have not seen it, my recommendation, should you go see it, depends on how much you give a shit about Demon Slayer. But if you do give a shit about Demon Slayer, you've probably seen it. But anyway, like, the conclusion of the fight is basically he invents a new special move, and I really, if you've heard me talk about this before, I think the most uninteresting way to end an anime fight is, here's a new special move I thought up and I beat you with it, because it just always feels like an ass pull, and it always feels like something that just isn't really that interesting. Now, there is another case of that in this movie that I think actually works, that I think is actually really cool. But yeah, that fight in particular, just I did not enjoy it very much. It also, I think this movie being a compressed movie, I think also in terms of like, showing months and months of manga storytelling and squeezing it down into 2.5 hours, it also shows how repetitive some of Gotoge's writing is. In this movie, there are no less than 3 family members of a character that commit suicide, and there's about 4 different family members who were sick and needed to be taken care of. And, then of course you just have like the demon massacres. Every character is, their family has been massacred by a demon, their sister, they're just whatever. And you're just getting these same kind of plot devices over and over and over. And like by the time the third family member committed suicide, I was just like, oh my God, can we work in some other stuff here? Yeah, and then like there's just the problem that the fact that the flashback segments go on for so long. There's one flashback segment, and like I didn't time it in the cinema. It felt like it was about 40 minutes long. And it was okay, and like the stuff it added to the story was cool. But yeah, I think all that makes Infinity Castle, like, for me at least, just a little bit tiresome. But that is not to say I didn't enjoy this movie. And the main reason for that is this movie had a huge section on my personal favorite Demon Slayer character, Akaza. And Akaza is this demon. He is the only character in Demon Slayer who doesn't fight with a sword. He fights with just his bare hands, which is always going to be a huge character plus for me. I love characters who just use martial arts in worlds where like everyone else uses weapons. And the 40 minute flashback segment I talked about is actually his story and his past, him learning to become a martial artist, and his past as a criminal, and like how he became a demon and all this stuff. And what I'd say is that it's way too fucking long, but when it gets you where it's trying to take you, I think it actually really works. And I think it actually creates this unbelievable fight scene with Akaza, where it's Akaza versus Tanjiro and the other fucking water sword dude who I don't really care about. It goes on for a long time, but I think it adds to the just grueling feeling of that fight. Like, this fight is brutal in a way that I didn't know Demon Slayer could be. And it was kind of weird because like when I was at the cinema, there was a bunch of like people bringing their like 8-year-old kids into this movie, and like even I was a bit like, oh, I don't know that I'd want like an 8-year-old watching some of the shit in here, because there's a lot of adult concepts, but there is bodies getting ripped apart like violently in this movie to an extent that I was quite surprised about. But not to say I didn't think it was cool. I love that shit. I just wonder about the 8-year-old girl who was sitting next to me, you know? But yeah, it's that final fight with Akaza that I really ended up loving with this movie. And there's this particular sequence where Tanjiro, like, he does the exact thing I talked about with Zenitsu, where he basically pulls out like this new technique. But I really actually appreciated it because there was all this build up to the technique, and it was, you know, it's the kind of anime thing where you're not building up to something greater, you are taking away all unnecessary movements. It's this whole idea that Zenitsu is able to master this sword stroke where he's able to take everything away but the sword stroke itself. So no excessive muscle use, no excessive like energy, no excessive killing intent. And I think if you've ever like really aspired to be good at something, you do eventually hit a point where you realize that to really become better at this thing, sometimes it's not about learning more, it's about removing all the unnecessary. Like when I'm making a video, the last 2 or 3 editing passes I do is trying to shave as much off that video as I possibly can, so that the only stuff that's left is actually the really pure good stuff. And like, that's incredibly difficult to do. It's really, really, really difficult. And I think this movie actually did a really fantastic job of kind of illustrating this like creative principle and applying it to this just absolutely desperate and brutal fight. And so ultimately, you know, while I'd have my criticisms of this movie, it's also something I really, really enjoyed. Like I came out of it very happy that I'd kind of experienced it. And I would say what's more is like when I was leaving, this family walked out, and they were there with their kids, and there was this little girl, and she must have been like, God, like, it was a different little girl than the one I was sitting beside, but she must have been like 9 years old or something. She was in Demon Slayer cosplay, and I just heard her say to her mom, "That was the best movie of all time." Like, she was like, "That was the best thing I've ever seen." And it's like, yeah, you know, I get it, because if I was 8 and I had seen that movie, I would have my fucking mind blown as well. In the same way that, like, you know, when I was like 6, I saw Akira, which I probably shouldn't have seen, but you know, that ended up being the star of, you know, loving anime and loving media and like everything else. So it was kind of like this moment where I was like, oh shit, maybe she's going to become like a crazy YouTuber also in 30 years. And so yeah, you know, it was good. Whatever criticisms I may have about the movie, other people do not seem to be feeling those same criticisms, because this movie has done absolute fucking gangbusters. At the time of writing, its global box office is at 250 million. To put some perspective on that, that's about half of what Superman is at, and it took Superman a while to get there. So yeah, Demon Slayer as a like piece of pop culture phenomenon doesn't seem to be slowing down, despite the fact that it's been over for several years. So yeah, if I was to rank it on my personal scale, I'd give it a 4. I thought it was like, yeah, I really enjoyed this, and while it had some issues, I thought it was cool. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to come on here and talk about it. That's all. Goodbye.